The ivory silk gown hung like a ghost in my bridal suite, its hand-sewn pearls catching the morning light streaming through the cathedral windows of Christ Church in Savannah's historic district. In exactly 3 hours, I would walk down that aisle to marry Ben Harper, heir to Harper Development Group and the man who had swept me off my feet 18 months ago at the Telfair Museum gala. "Clara, darling, you look absolutely radiant," my sister Gwen said, adjusting the vintage veil that had been my grandmother's. The same veil she'd worn when she married my grandfather in 1962, back when promises still meant something. I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. The woman looking back at me was everything I'd dreamed of becoming: successful architect with my own firm, engaged to one of Savannah's most prominent developers, about to have the wedding of the century in one of the city's most beautiful churches. So why did something feel so terribly wrong? Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The photographer wants to get some shots of you with the dress before the ceremony. "My maid of honor," Sarah announced, bustling into the room with her characteristic efficiency. She'd been my college roommate and closest friend for 10 years, the one person who knew all my secrets. Well, almost all of them. As the photographer positioned me for the shots, I caught sight of Ben through the window. He was standing in the courtyard below, perfectly groomed in his custom navy suit, laughing with his groomsmen. Everything about the scene looked perfect from the outside: the handsome groom, the picturesque church, the army of wedding planners ensuring every detail was flawless. But I'd learned that perfection often hid the deepest flaws. My phone buzzed with a text message. Ben, probably sending me one of his sweet pre-wedding messages. Instead, I found something that made my blood freeze. "Emergency with the Meridian project. Major investor crisis. Have to handle this first. Start without me." I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. Start without me? What kind of groom tells his bride to start their wedding without him? "Everything all right, honey?" Sarah asked, noticing my expression. "Ben says there's an emergency with work," I managed, my voice barely steady. "He wants us to start without him." The room fell silent. Gwen's face went pale. The photographer lowered his camera, and Sarah's mouth dropped open in disbelief. "That's impossible," Gwen stammered. "It's his wedding day. Surely whatever it is can wait a few hours." I called his number. Straight to voicemail. Called again. Same result. "Maybe there's been some miscommunication," Sarah suggested weakly, but her expression said she knew better. In college, she'd watched me date men who always put everything else before our relationship. She'd hoped Ben was different. I walked to the window, my designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Down in the courtyard, Ben was gone. His groomsmen were scattered, checking their phones with confused expressions. The best man, his brother, Jonathan, was pacing frantically while talking on his cell. Another text came through, this time from Jonathan. "Ben left for the office. Says the Meridian deal collapsed and only he can fix it. I don't know what to tell people." The Meridian deal. The same deal Ben had been obsessing over for months, working late nights and weekends, canceling dinner plans and postponing conversations about our future. The deal that he'd claimed was worth more than $20 million to Harper Development. More than our wedding, apparently. "Ladies and gentlemen," I heard the wedding coordinator's voice echoing from the chapel's sound system. "We're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain seated while we sort out a small logistical issue." A small logistical issue. That's what I'd become, a logistical issue to be managed while Ben handled more important matters. I sank into the antique chair by the window, my elaborate train pooling around me like spilled cream. 200 guests were seated in that chapel, including Ben's parents, his business associates, my extended family who'd flown in from across the country. The flowers alone had cost $8,000. The reception venue was prepared for a sit-down dinner with a string quartet already warming up. And the groom had gone to the office. "Clara," Gwen said gently, kneeling beside my chair. "What do you want to do?" What did I want to do? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to call Ben and demand he explain how a business deal could be more important than the woman he claimed to love. But mostly, I wanted to understand how I'd gotten here. The truth was, I'd been seeing warning signs for months. Ben canceling our engagement party planning session for a client dinner, forgetting our anniversary because of a board meeting, taking calls during romantic dinners, always apologizing, but never changing. I'd told myself it was temporary stress, that things would be different after the wedding. Miss Monroe? The wedding coordinator appeared in the doorway, her professional smile strained. The guests are getting restless. Shall I make an announcement about the delay? Before I could answer, Jonathan burst into the room, his face flushed and tie askew. Clara, I'm so sorry, he began, then stopped when he saw my expression. You already know. Where did he go? I asked quietly. Harper Development downtown office. The Japanese investors pulled out of the Meridian deal unexpectedly. Ben said. Jonathan paused, looking uncomfortable. What did he say? He said the deal was worth more than a wedding that's already paid for. That you'd understand because you're a businesswoman too. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just that he'd prioritized business over our wedding, but that he'd calculated it so coldly. The wedding was already paid for. So what was the rush? I'd still be there when he finished making his money. Sarah grabbed my hand. Clara, you don't have to. I can't do this, I said, standing up so quickly that my train caught on the chair. I can't marry someone who thinks our wedding is a business transaction he can reschedule. Gwen stood too, her eyes flashing with an anger I recognized. She'd been through her own divorce 3 years ago, and she knew the signs of a man who would always put his wife second. Good, she said firmly. Because any man who abandons his bride on their wedding day doesn't deserve her. The wedding coordinator stepped forward. Miss Monroe, if you'd like to postpone, not postpone, I said, my voice growing stronger. Cancel. Please ask everyone to go to the reception venue. We'll turn it into a celebration of not making a terrible mistake. As the coordinator hurried away to manage the chaos, I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me was no longer the radiant bride. She was something else entirely, someone who just learned that sometimes the best decision you can make is to walk away from everything you thought you wanted. 2 hours later, I stood in my townhouse on Jones Street, still in my wedding dress, watching the Spanish moss sway in the afternoon breeze. The house was a 1,850 renovation I'd restored myself, with original heart pine floors and soaring ceilings. It was supposed to be our first home together. Now it was just mine. The doorbell rang, and I found a small potted orchid on my doorstep with a handwritten note. Welcome to the neighborhood. Your new next-door neighbors. Hope you'll find peace here. Grandy looked toward the matching townhouse next door, where I could hear the sound of a child laughing in the garden. For the first time all day, I almost smiled. Maybe solitude wouldn't be so lonely after all. 3 days after the wedding that never was, I was sitting on my front steps in paint-stained jeans and an old college sweatshirt, staring at color swatches. For the guest cottage I'd decided to renovate. The project was partly practical. I needed something to do with my hands, and partly therapeutic. There's something about tearing down walls that helps you rebuild yourself. The sound of a ball bouncing against my garden gate interrupted my brooding. Then came a small voice. Oh no, oh no, oh no. I looked up to see a girl around 10 years old, peering through the wrought iron, her dark curls escaping from a ponytail, paint streaking her school uniform. I'm so sorry, she called out. My ball went over your fence. I was just practicing for PE, and it bounced weird off the brick. I walked over and found a slightly deflated soccer ball nestled among my grandmother's camellia bushes. No harm done, I said, handing it back through the gate. Though you might want to aim away from the flowers next time. She grinned sheepishly. Dad says I have terrible spatial awareness. I'm Maya, by the way. Maya Grant. We moved in next door last month. Clara Monroe. And your dad left me a very thoughtful welcome gift. The orchid. He said you looked like you needed something beautiful. Then he got all embarrassed and said, that sounded weird. Maya tilted her head, studying me with the unfiltered curiosity of a child. Are you the lady who was supposed to get married? I felt my cheeks warm. Word travels fast in this neighborhood, Mrs. Ashford told Dad when she saw all the wedding boxes being delivered, then taken away again. She said you were very brave. Maya paused. Dad said Mrs. Ashford talks too much, but that she was probably right about the brave part. Before I could respond, a deep voice called from the house next door. Maya, what did I tell you about bothering the neighbors? She's not bothering me, I called back, then felt foolish for shouting to someone I couldn't see. A moment later, a man appeared at the garden gate, tall, with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of tired eyes that spoke of long nights and difficult decisions. He was wearing scrubs under a light jacket, and I noticed his hands were surgeon steady as he reached for the gate latch. I'm sorry, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. Maya has a tendency to make friends with everyone in a 3-block radius. I'm Clara, I said, then realized I was still holding paint swatches. And I was just thinking I could use some company. He smiled, a careful, measured expression that suggested he didn't do it often. Elias Grant. And I should probably explain about the orchid. I'm not usually in the habit of leaving flowers for strangers, but Maya said you looked sad when you were moving boxes. She was right, I admitted. And the orchid was perfect. Thank you. Maya bounced the ball against her leg. Dad, can we invite Clara for coffee? You made too much again, and she looks like she could use some caffeine. Maya, Elias said, his tone gently warning. It's fine, I said quickly. I'd actually love some coffee, if you don't mind the company of someone who's been living on takeout and wine for 3 days. 20 minutes later, we were sitting on our adjoining porches, Maya having retreated inside to work on homework. Elias had made excellent coffee and produced a plate of what looked like homemade cookies, though he insisted they were store-bought. So, I said, settling into my wicker chair, Maya mentioned you're new to Savannah too? 3 months now. I'm a trauma surgeon at Memorial Health. We moved here from Charleston after. He paused, looking out at the Spanish moss swaying in the late afternoon light. After my wife died, the words hung in the air between us, heavy with a grief I recognized. Not the same as mine, but grief nonetheless. I'm sorry, I said softly. Thank you. It's been 2 years, but Maya needed a change of scenery. She was having nightmares, and our old house had too many memories. He took a sip of his coffee. What about you? Are you from here? Born and raised, though I lived in Atlanta for a while after college. I'm an architect. I have a small firm downtown. I restored this house myself when I moved back 5 years ago. It's beautiful work, he said, and I could tell he meant it. The proportions are perfect. You kept the original character while making it livable. That's exactly what I was going for. I believe in honoring the past while creating space for the future. I paused, realizing how that sounded given recent events. Or at least, I used to believe that. Elias studied me with those tired, intelligent eyes. Maya told me what happened. With your wedding, I mean. I'm sorry. The whole neighborhood knows apparently, Mrs. Ashford is thorough in her information gathering. But Maya was right, what you did took courage. Did it? Because mostly I feel like I just got lucky. Like I dodged a bullet I didn't even see coming. Sometimes that's what courage looks like, he said quietly. Recognizing when something isn't right and being willing to walk away from it, even when walking away is terrifying. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the light change as evening approached. There was something soothing about his presence, not the electric excitement I'd felt with Ben, but something steadier, more real. Dad? Maya appeared in the doorway, holding up a piece of paper. I finished my art project. Want to see? Of course, Elias said, and I was struck by how his entire demeanor softened when he looked at his daughter. Maya bounded over and held up her drawing, a house with 2 front doors, stick figures on both porches, and a garden full of flowers. That looked suspiciously like my camellias. It's our street, she announced proudly. That's you and me and Dad, and that's Clara. I drew her because she's part of the neighborhood now. I looked at the drawing, at the careful way Maya had included me in her new world, and felt something shift in my chest. Not healing exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. It's beautiful, Maya, I said. Would you mind if I kept a copy? I could frame it for my office. Her face lit up. Really? You'd put my drawing in your office? Absolutely. It's the nicest welcome gift I've ever received. As Maya ran inside to make me a copy, Elias and I found ourselves alone again. The evening was settling around us, bringing with it the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of church bells. She likes you, he said simply. I like her too. She's got good instincts. She does. Better than mine sometimes. He paused. We should probably head in soon. School night and all, of course. I stood, gathering my coffee cup. Thank you for this. For the coffee and the company. I didn't realize how much I needed normal conversation with normal people. Anytime, he said. And I believed he meant it. And Clara? If you ever need anything, a cup of sugar, someone to hold a ladder while you're renovating, a friend to talk to, her right next door. As I walked back to my house, I could hear Maya chattering excitedly about her drawing and asking if they could invite me for dinner sometime. Elias's response was too quiet to hear, but his tone was warm. For the first time since Ben's disappearance, I felt something other than anger or hurt. I felt possibility. Not romance, I was nowhere near ready for that, but the possibility of friendship, of community, of building something new in the ruins of what I'd lost. Later that night, as I sat at my kitchen table with Maya's drawing propped against a wine bottle, I realized that maybe solitude wasn't what I needed after all. Maybe what I needed was to remember that there were still good people in the world, people who showed up when they said they would, who kept their promises even when those promises were as simple as making coffee for a heartbroken neighbor. I looked around my empty house, the house that was supposed to be full of wedding gifts and shared dreams, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt like a beginning. The first box I opened contained our wedding china, delicate Wedgwood pieces that Ben had insisted on registering for because they'd appreciate in value. I'd wanted something simpler, more personal, but Ben had a way of making his preferences sound like the only logical choice. Now, looking at the pristine plates wrapped in tissue paper, I wondered how many other decisions had been made the same way. I was sitting in my dining room, surrounded by boxes that needed to be returned, when I found the envelope wedged between two place settings. Thick legal paper with Harper Development Group letterhead, my name written in Ben's careful handwriting across the front. Inside was a prenuptial agreement, unsigned, undated, but detailed enough to make my hands shake as I read it. According to the terms, I would have no claim to any property acquired before our marriage, no rights to Ben's business interests, and in the event of divorce, I would receive a settlement of exactly $50,000 provided I signed a non-disclosure agreement about the private affairs of the Harper family. I'd never seen this document before. We'd never discussed a prenup. Ben had always said our marriage would be a true partnership, that what was his was mine. But here, in black and white, was proof that he'd been planning for our failure from the very beginning. My phone rang, startling me out of my fury. Gwen's number. "How's the great box purge going?" she asked, her voice deliberately cheerful. "I found something," I said, my voice tight. Ben had a prenup drawn up. I never saw it, never signed it. "But it's brutal, Gwen. It would have left me with nothing. That bastard," Gwen said, and I could hear her anger crackling through the phone. "Clara, you need to talk to a lawyer. This smells like more than just cold feet, I know. But first, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. There's something else going on here, something bigger than just a man getting scared of commitment." After we hung up, I sat staring at the prenup, my architect's mind analyzing the structure of Ben's deception. The document was dated 6 months ago, right around the time he'd started working late and canceling our plans. When I'd asked about his preoccupation, he'd blamed it on the Meridian project, but now I wondered if there had been other projects, other pressures I'd known nothing about. A knock at my door interrupted my brooding. Through the peephole, I saw Maya holding a large canvas, Elias standing behind her with paint-stained hands. "We brought you something," Maya announced when I opened the door. "It's for your guest cottage project." The canvas was a painting of my house, but not as it was, now as it could be. Maya had painted the guest cottage restored and beautiful, with a garden full of flowers and a sign that read Monroe Architecture Studio. "Maya thought you might want to put your office in the cottage," Elias explained. "She said it would be nice to work from home sometimes." I looked at the painting, at the way Maya had imagined my future, and felt tears prick my eyes. "It's perfect," I managed. "How did you know exactly what I needed to see?" "Because Dad says when you're fixing something broken, you have to imagine it whole first," Maya said, matter-of-factly. "And your cottage looked sad, so I painted it happy. Would you like to see the cottage?" I asked impulsively. "I just started the renovation, but you could tell me what you think." Maya's face lit up, and even Elias looked interested. We walked through my house to the back garden, where the small cottage sat waiting for transformation. It had been servants' quarters originally, then a carriage house, and most recently a storage shed for the previous owners. "The bones are good," I explained, unlocking the door. "Original brick, solid foundation. I'm thinking of making it a studio space, maybe adding a loft for overnight guests." Maya ran around the space, her imagination already at work. "You could put big windows here for the light, and maybe a reading nook in that corner." "She's got good spatial sense," Elias observed, watching his daughter measure distances with her arms. "Better than she gives herself credit for." As we explored the cottage, I found myself relaxing for the first time in days. There was something soothing about planning a future project, about imagining something beautiful rising from neglect. And there was something equally soothing about Elias's presence, the way he asked thoughtful questions about load-bearing walls and electrical work, the way he listened when I explained my vision for the space. What made you decide to be an architect? He asked, as Maya examined the old brick chimney. I like the idea of creating something lasting, I said. Something that would be beautiful and functional long after I was gone. My grandmother always said that a house should tell a story, and I wanted to be someone who helped tell those stories. And now, I considered the question. Now I'm not sure what story I'm telling. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my judgment, about my future, it's all been called into question. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Elias said quietly. Maybe it's an opportunity to write a new story, one that's entirely yours. After they left, I sat in the cottage with Maya's painting propped against the wall, thinking about stories and foundations, and the difference between building something that looked good and building something that would last. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Clara, this is Harriet Ashford from down the street. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I wanted to invite you for tea tomorrow afternoon. I have some lovely Earl Grey and some information about the Harper family that you might find interesting. Your neighbors. Ashford, the gossipy neighbor Maya had mentioned. Every instinct told me to decline, to handle my problems privately. But as I looked at the prenup still sitting on my dining room table, I realized that privacy might have been part of the problem. Maybe it was time to stop protecting Ben's secrets and start uncovering them. I texted back, I'd love to come for tea. What time works for you? Her response came immediately, 4 o'clock. And Clara, bring that prenup you found. I suspect it's not the only document Ben Harper never intended for you to see. I stared at the phone, wondering how Mrs. Ashford could possibly know about the prenup. Then I remembered Maya's comment about her thorough information gathering and realized that in a neighborhood like this, secrets had a way of surfacing whether you wanted them to or not. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a glass of wine and a legal pad, writing down everything I could remember about Ben's behavior over the past 6 months. The late nights, the canceled plans, the phone calls he'd taken another room, the way he'd deflected questions about the wedding timeline, insisting we wait until after the Meridian project was complete, the credit card statements he'd started receiving at his office instead of our shared address. Individually, these things had seemed like the normal stresses of a successful businessman. Together, they painted a picture of someone with secrets to hide, someone who'd been planning to disappear long before our wedding day. I thought about Elias's words about writing a new story, and I realized that before I could do that, I needed to understand the ending of the old one. I needed to know why Ben had really left, and what he'd been so afraid I might discover. The cottage renovation could wait. The story I needed to tell right now was the truth about Ben Harper. And tomorrow, over tea and gossip, I was going to start uncovering it. Outside, I could hear the soft sound of Elias reading to Maya, their voices carrying through the open windows. It was a sound of safety, of consistency, of the kind of quiet devotion that built strong foundations. The kind of love I'd thought I'd had with Ben, but now realized I'd never experienced at all. Maybe Elias was right. Maybe losing what I'd thought I wanted was an opportunity to discover what I actually needed. And maybe, just maybe, what I needed was already living right next door. Harriet Ashford's house was everything mine wasn't: ornate, over-decorated, and filled with the kind of antiques that whispered secrets if you knew how to listen. She greeted me at the door wearing pearls and a knowing smile that immediately put me on edge. Clara, darling, come in. I've been looking forward to our chat. She led me through a parlor stuffed with family portraits and into a sun-drenched conservatory where afternoon tea was laid out with military precision. I do hope you don't mind the formality. At my age, ritual becomes increasingly important. I settled into a wicker chair, the prenup tucked in my purse like evidence of a crime. Mrs. Ashford, how did you know about the document I found? Please, call me Harriet. And my dear, when you've lived in Savannah as long as I have, you learn that the walls have ears and the Spanish moss has eyes. She poured tea from an elaborate silver service. Besides, I've been watching the Harper family for 30 years. They've always been careless about their paperwork. She handed me a delicate china cup, then sat back with the satisfied air of someone about to reveal a well-kept secret. Tell me, Clara, what do you know about Ben's father? About the way Harper Development really makes its money. Commercial, real estate mostly, some residential developments. Ben always said they specialized in historic preservation projects. Harriet's laugh was sharp as crystal. Historic preservation. That's what they call it when they buy beautiful old buildings for pennies on the dollar, gut them, and sell them to the highest bidder. Do you know how they acquire those properties so cheaply? I shook my head, though a cold certainty was settling in my stomach. Political connections, my dear. Campaign contributions that guarantee zoning variances. Building inspectors who find violations that mysteriously disappear for the right price. City council members who vote to declare perfectly sound buildings structurally unsound so they can be condemned and sold at auction. I started, then stopped. Illegal was the word I couldn't bring myself to say. Exactly. Harriet sipped her tea primly. And 6 months ago, someone started asking very uncomfortable questions about Harper Development's business practices. A federal investigator, I believe. Something about misuse of historic preservation grants. The timeline clicked into place. 6 months ago, Ben had started working late. 6 months ago, the prenup had been drawn up. 6 months ago, he'd become a stranger. You think Ben knew he was under investigation? I think Ben knew his family was about to lose everything, and he needed a way out that wouldn't implicate him. Harriet's eyes were sharp as she studied my reaction. Tell me, dear, did Ben ever ask you to invest money in his projects? Or perhaps to put any assets in your name? I thought back to the conversations we'd had about combining our finances after the wedding, about the investment opportunities he'd mentioned. At the time, I'd been flattered that he wanted to include me in his business decisions. Now, those conversations took on a darker cast. He wanted me to be a partner in a new development project. He said it would be a good way to merge our professional lives. I felt sick as I said it. He wanted me to put up $200,000 and sign as the primary contractor, making you legally responsible if anything went wrong, Harriet said grimly. Clara, I believe Ben Harper didn't abandon you at the altar out of fear of commitment. I believe he disappeared because marrying you would have made you a liability he couldn't afford. I set down my teacup with shaking hands. Where is he now? No one knows for certain, but his car was found at the airport, and there are rumors of a private flight to the Cayman Islands the morning after your wedding. The same morning, incidentally, that the FBI raided Harper Development's offices, the conservatory felt suddenly airless. Everything I'd thought I knew about Ben, about our relationship, about my own judgment, crumbled like a house built on sand. I'd been so focused on feeling rejected and humiliated that I'd missed the real truth. I hadn't been abandoned by a lover. I'd been discarded by a criminal who no longer needed me as cover. I need to call a lawyer, I said finally. Yes, you do. But first, you need to decide how far you're willing to go to get justice. Harriet leaned forward, her expression serious. The Harper family has powerful friends in this city. If you come forward with what you know, they'll try to destroy you. They'll claim you were complicit, that you knew about the illegal activities, and participated willingly, but I didn't know anything. Can you prove that? Do you have documentation of every conversation, every meeting, every financial discussion you had with Ben? Because I guarantee you, they have lawyers who specialize in making innocent people look guilty. I thought about the prenup, about the way Ben had isolated me from his business dealings while making me believe we were partners. He'd been protecting himself from the very beginning, creating a paper trail that would exonerate him and implicate me if necessary. So what are you suggesting I do? I'm suggesting you arm yourself with information before you make any decisions. And I'm suggesting you accept that justice and revenge are not the same thing. One will heal you, and the other will consume you. I left Harriet's house with more questions than answers and a growing sense that my quiet life in Savannah was about to become very complicated. As I walked home through the tree-lined streets, I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before. Which houses had been recently renovated, which ones bore the small brass plaques indicating historic preservation grants. How many of them had been Harper Development projects? My phone rang as I reached my front gate. Gwen's number. I've been calling lawyers all afternoon, she said without preamble. I found someone who specializes in financial fraud cases. She wants to meet with you tomorrow. Gwen, I need to tell you something. This is bigger than just Ben leaving me at the altar. I filled her in on everything Harriet had told me about the federal investigation and Ben's disappearance. By the time I finished, Gwen was quiet for a long moment. Clara, she said finally, promise me you'll be careful. If Ben was involved in criminal activity, His family won't hesitate to throw you under the bus to protect themselves. After we hung up, I sat on my front steps watching the evening light filter through the Spanish moss. The neighborhood looked the same as always, peaceful, genteel, frozen in time. But now I understood that beneath the surface beauty lay currents of corruption and deceit that went back generations. Rough day. I looked up to find Elias standing at his gate, still in scrubs, his surgical cap tucked under his arm. There was something deeply comforting about his presence, about the way he offered companionship without demanding explanations. You could say that. I'm starting to think my ex-fiancé was more of a criminal than a coward. He opened his gate and crossed to mine, settling beside me on the steps without asking permission. Want to talk about it? I found myself telling him everything about the prenup, about Harriet's revelations, about the growing certainty that I'd been targeted as much as I'd been loved. Elias listened without interrupting, his presence steady and reassuring. What are you going to do? He asked when I finished. I don't know. Part of me wants to forget the whole thing, to just be grateful I escaped and move on with my life. But another part of me thinks about all the people who might have been hurt by Ben's family's corruption, all the historic buildings that were destroyed for profit. How can I stay silent about that? You can't, he said simply. It's not who you are. How do you know who I am? We've only known each other a week. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft. Because I've watched you with Maya. I've seen how you listen to her, how you make her feel heard and valued. I've seen how you're restoring your cottage with respect for its history while making it functional for the future. You're someone who cares about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. His words warmed something in my chest that had been cold since the wedding. Your ex-wife was lucky to have you. No, he said, his voice thick with old pain. Sarah was unlucky too. Die in a car accident caused by a drunk driver who got a slap on the wrist because his family had connections. She was unlucky to leave behind a daughter who still has nightmares about losing everyone she loves. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that staying silent in the face of injustice doesn't protect anyone. It just lets the powerful people stay powerful. We sat together as darkness fell, not speaking, but not alone. Somewhere in the house next door, Maya was practicing piano, the sound of scales drifting through the evening air. It was a sound of normalcy, of the kind of life I'd thought I wanted with Ben, but now realized I'd never actually had. Elias, I said finally, if I do this, if I come forward about Ben, it's going to get messy. There will be reporters and lawyers and probably a lot of unpleasant publicity. Are you sure you want neighbors like that? He turned to look at me, and in the porch light, I could see the conviction in his eyes. Clara, I want neighbors who stand up for what's right. Mine needs to see that the world has people in it who fight back when powerful people do wrong things. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I need to remember that good people exist, even when everything feels broken. Later that night, I called the lawyer Gwen had found and scheduled an appointment for the next morning. Then I sat in my kitchen with a legal pad, writing down everything I could remember about Ben's business dealings, every conversation that had seemed odd at the time, every moment when my instincts had warned me that something wasn't right. I was building a case, I realized, not just against Ben, but for myself, for the woman I'd been before I'd let his charm and status cloud my judgment, for the woman I was becoming now that I could see clearly again. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its nightly quiet, but for the first time since Ben's disappearance, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the space between one chapter ending and another beginning. And for the first time, I was ready to write that new chapter myself. The law offices of Patricia Wells were located in a converted antebellum mansion on Bull Street, where modern glass tables sat beside original crown molding in a marriage of old and new that felt appropriate for my situation. Patricia herself was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen every type of fraud imaginable. Miss Monroe, she said, settling behind her desk with the file I'd sent over the previous evening. I've reviewed the documents you provided, and I have to say, this is one of the more sophisticated setups I've encountered. Your ex-fiancé was very careful to position himself as the victim of your supposed greed while simultaneously setting you up to take the fall for his family's criminal activities. I shifted in my chair, still struggling to accept that Ben had been playing a long game from the very beginning. What exactly are my legal options? Well, the good news is that you never signed the prenup, so you're not bound by its terms. The bad news is that if the federal investigation into Harper Development leads to criminal charges, they may try to implicate you based on your personal relationship with Ben and your professional relationship with some of their projects, but I didn't know about any illegal activities. Proving that will require documentation, email correspondence, financial records, anything that shows you were kept in the dark about the true nature of their business dealings. Patricia leaned forward. The question is, how far are you willing to go to protect yourself and potentially help the federal investigation? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I glanced at it and felt my stomach drop. The text was from Ben. We need to talk. Meet me at Forsyth Park, North Entrance, p.m. Come alone. Patricia noticed my expression. What is it? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I showed her the message. Her eyebrows rose. Miss Monroe, I strongly advise against meeting with Mr. Harper without legal representation present. If he's contacting you now, it's because he needs something from you, and that makes you either valuable or dangerous to him. But this might be my only chance to get answers, to understand why he did what he did. And it might be a chance for him to manipulate you into staying quiet or worse, to implicate you in his crimes. Patricia's voice was firm. If you insist on meeting with him, I'll be nearby, and you'll wear a wire. An hour later, I was walking through Forsyth Park with a recording device hidden in my jacket, feeling like a character in a crime drama. The park was busy with tourists and locals enjoying the afternoon sun, which made me feel slightly safer but also more aware of how surreal my life had become. I spotted Ben sitting on a bench near the fountain, looking thinner than I remembered, and wearing sunglasses despite the shade from the oak trees. He stood when he saw me approaching, and for a moment, my heart did the same foolish flutter it had always done when I saw him. Then I remembered Harriet's words about justice versus revenge and steeled myself. Clara, he said, reaching as if to embrace me, then dropping his hands when I stepped back. You look well. I look like someone who was abandoned at the altar a week ago, I said evenly. Why did you want to meet? He sat back down, gesturing for me to join him. I remained standing. I know you're angry, he began, and you have every right to be. What I did was inexcusable, but I need you to understand that I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what, Ben? From marrying you? Because it seems like that worked out well for both of us. He flinched. From the investigation, from the fallout that's coming. Clara, my family's business is about to be destroyed, and anyone connected to it is going to be collateral damage. I couldn't let that happen to you. So, you just disappeared? Without a word of explanation? Without giving me a choice in the matter? I left you a text message saying you had a business emergency is not an explanation, Ben. It's cowardice. I crossed my arms. Did you ever love me? Or was I just a convenient cover story? His silence was answer enough. The prenup. I continued, watching his face carefully. When were you planning to spring that on me? You found it. He rubbed his forehead, looking genuinely distressed. Clara, I know how it looks, but the prenup was just a precaution. My lawyers insisted on it. Your lawyers insisted on making me liable for your family's crimes while ensuring I'd get nothing if we divorced? Ben's head snapped up. What are you talking about? What crimes? Either he was an excellent actor, or he genuinely didn't understand how deep his family's corruption went. I decided to test which one it was. The historic preservation grants, Ben. The building condemnations that happen to coincide with your development projects. The federal investigation that's been going on for 6 months. His face went pale beneath his tan. Clara, I swear to you, I don't know anything about federal investigations. My family has always operated within the law. Your car was found at the airport. There are rumors about a flight to the Cayman Islands. I watched him carefully. If you're innocent, why did you run? Because my father told me to. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised me. The morning of our wedding, he came to my apartment and said I needed to leave town immediately. He said there were problems with the business that I didn't understand, and that the best thing I could do was disappear until they were resolved. And you just went along with that, without asking questions? My father has always protected our family. I trusted his judgment. Ben looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion in his eyes. Clara, I know I handled this badly. I know I hurt you. But I need you to stay out of this. Don't talk to investigators. Don't hire lawyers. Don't try to get involved. Just let it blow over. Let what blow over, Ben? What exactly is your family involved in? I don't know, he said, and the frustration in his voice was real. That's what I'm trying to tell you. My father has always handled the business side of things. I just did what I was told, signed what I was asked to sign, showed up where I was supposed to show up. I never asked questions because I never thought I needed to. Looking at him sitting there tan, privileged, and utterly clueless about the damage his family had done, I felt something shift inside me. The last vestige of love I'd carried for him died, replaced by a clear-eyed understanding of who Ben Harper really was, not a villain, but a weak man who'd let stronger people make his decisions for him, including the decision to abandon me. Ben, I said quietly, I'm going to cooperate with the federal investigation. I'm going to tell them everything I know about your family's business practices and everything you told me about your projects. I'm going to make sure that if crimes were committed, the people responsible are held accountable. Clara, no. You don't understand what you're getting involved in. My family has connections, influence. They'll destroy you. They'll try, I agreed. But I'm not going to live in fear of people who abuse their power. And I'm not going to protect a man who chose his family's corruption over our relationship. I turned to walk away, then paused. Ben, the next time you run away from something difficult, try to find the courage to at least say goodbye. As I walked back toward the park entrance, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but free. Free from the weight of loving someone who didn't deserve it. Free from the fantasy of a life that had been built on lies. Free to become the person I was meant to be rather than the person Ben had needed me to be. Patricia was waiting for me in her car at the edge of the park. She rolled down the window as I approached. How did it go? I think Ben is more of a fool than a criminal, I said, climbing into the passenger seat. But his family definitely is involved in something serious, and he's chosen to protect them, rather than face the truth. Good enough, Patricia said, starting the car. The recording will be useful for the federal investigators. It establishes that you were kept in the dark about the family's activities and that Ben knew you were pursuing legal action. As we drove back toward her office, I thought about Elias's words from the previous evening about the importance of fighting back against injustice. I thought about Maya's painting of my cottage restored and beautiful, about the possibility of building something good from the wreckage of what I'd lost. Patricia, I said as we pulled into the parking garage, what are the chances that the Harper family will face serious consequences for what they've done? With your cooperation and the evidence the federal investigators have been gathering, I'd say very good. She turned off the engine and looked at me seriously. But Clara, you need to understand that this process is going to be difficult. There will be depositions, possibly a trial. The Harper family's lawyers will try to discredit you in any way they can. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the woman who had stood in that bridal suite a week ago, devastated by a man's abandonment and ashamed of her own prejudgment. Then I thought about the woman I was becoming, someone who asked hard questions, who demanded honest answers, who refused to be silenced by powerful people who thought they were above the law. Yes, I said firmly, I'm ready. The next morning brought two significant developments: a formal request from the FBI to interview me about my relationship with Ben Harper, and a knock on my door from Maya, who was holding a plate of what looked like burnt cookies, and wearing an expression of determined cheerfulness. Dad made these for you, she announced, holding up the plate. Well, I helped. That's why they're a little crispy. He said you might need something sweet today. I accepted the cookies, which were indeed more charcoal than chocolate chip, and invited Maya in for milk to go with them. As we sat at my kitchen table, carefully dunking the cookies to soften them, I found myself grateful for the normalcy of her presence. Dad's worried about you, Maya said matter-of-factly. He keeps looking at your house and frowning. He does that when he's thinking about something sad. Your dad is very kind. But I'm going to be fine. Are you going to move away? The question was casual, but I could hear the anxiety underneath it. Dad said sometimes when grown-ups have big problems, they go somewhere else to fix them. I looked at this little girl who had somehow become important to me in the space of a week, who had included me in her drawings and her world without reservation, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in my chest. Maya, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and you and your dad are my neighbors. Sometimes neighbors go through difficult times, but that doesn't mean they abandon each other. Her relief was visible. Good, because I like having you next door. And Dad smiles more when you're around. An hour later, as Maya headed off to school and I prepared for my FBI interview, I carried her words with me like a talisman. I was fighting for more than just justice against the Harper family. I was fighting for the right to build a life in this neighborhood, among these people who had welcomed me when I was broken and were supporting me as I healed. The federal building downtown was all concrete and glass, a stark contrast to the historic charm of the rest of Savannah. Special Agent Rebecca Torres was a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet authority that came from years of dealing with white-collar criminals who thought they were smarter than law enforcement. "Miss Monroe," she said, settling across from me in a sterile conference room, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I understand this situation has been personally difficult for you." "It has," I admitted, "but I want to help however I can." For the next 3 hours, Agent Torres walked me through my entire relationship with Ben, focusing on any conversations about business deals, any requests for financial involvement, any mention of political connections or unusual business practices. I told her about the prenup, about Ben's sudden departure, about our meeting in Forsyth Park. "Miss Monroe, based on what you've told me, I believe you were being groomed to serve as a front for Harper Development's illegal activities. If you had married Mr. Harper and invested in his projects as he requested, you would have provided them with a legitimate face for their money laundering operations while also serving as a potential scapegoat if the investigation uncovered their activities." The words hit me like a physical blow. "So everything between us was a lie?" "I can't speak to Mr. Harper's personal feelings," Agent Torres said gently, "but I can tell you that the timeline of your relationship corresponds exactly with when our investigation began. His family needed someone with a clean reputation and independent financial resources who could be manipulated into participating in their schemes without understanding the true nature of what they were doing." I left the federal building feeling hollowed out and strangely relieved at the same time. Hollowed out because the last vestige of romantic illusion about Ben had been stripped away. Our entire relationship had been a calculated business decision. Relieved because it meant my instincts weren't as bad as I'd feared. I hadn't failed to see warning signs. I'd been the target of a sophisticated con. My phone rang as I was walking back to my car. Gwen's number. "How did it go with the FBI?" "They confirmed what we suspected. Ben's family was using me as cover for money laundering, and if I'd married him, I would have been legally implicated in their crimes." I unlocked my car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. "Gwen, I was never really Ben's fiancé. I was his mark." "Oh honey." Gwen's voice was soft with sympathy. "I'm sorry. I know that probably hurts in a different way than just being abandoned. Actually, it's liberating. It means I didn't fall in love with a criminal. I fell in love with a lie. The real Ben Harper is someone I never actually met. What happens now?" "Now I wait to see if they need me to testify, and I get on with building a life that's actually mine." That evening, as I sat on my front porch with a glass of wine and the plans for my cottage renovation, Elias appeared at his gate. He was still in scrubs, but his expression was more relaxed than it had been that morning. "Maya told me you promised not to move away," he said, crossing to lean against my porch railing. "I did. This is my home, and I'm not letting the Harper family chase me out of it." "Good." He was quiet for a moment, studying the cottage plans spread across my table. "Those look ambitious. I'm thinking about turning it into more than just a studio. Maybe a proper guest house, or even a small apartment for short-term rentals. Something that could generate income while I rebuild my business." "Rebuild? Is your firm in trouble?" I hadn't meant to reveal that detail, but something about Elias's presence made it easy. To be honest, 3 of my clients decided they didn't want to work with someone involved in a federal investigation. Even though I'm the victim, not the perpetrator, they don't want the association. "I'm sorry. That's not fair." "No, but it's reality. Reputation matters in architecture, especially in a city like Savannah where so much work involves historic preservation. If people think I'm connected to the Harper family's corruption, they won't trust me with their projects." Elias was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What would you do if money weren't an issue? If you could design any project, what would it be?" I looked at him, surprised by the question. "Affordable housing," I said without hesitation. "Beautiful, well-designed homes for people who don't usually get to live in beautiful places." There's this assumption that low-income housing has to be ugly and cheap, but I think everyone deserves to live somewhere that makes them feel valued. Then do that. It's not that simple. Affordable housing projects require investors, government approvals, community support, all of which you could get if you had the right backing and the right reputation. Elias sat down in the chair across from me, his expression serious. Clara, what if fighting the Harper family isn't just about justice? What if it's about establishing yourself as someone who stands up for what's right? Someone communities would want to work with because they trust your integrity? I stared at him, feeling something shift in my perspective. I'd been thinking about the federal investigation as something I had to endure, a necessary step toward putting the Ben disaster behind me. But Elias was suggesting I think about it as a foundation for the future I wanted to build. You think I should go public? Beyond just cooperating with the investigation, I think you should consider it. There's power in controlling your own narrative, in being the person who stands up and says this is wrong rather than the person who suffers in silence. And if it destroys what's left of my career, then you'll build a new one. From what I've seen, you're good at building things from the ground up. That night, I sat in my kitchen with my laptop, researching journalists who covered corruption cases and public interest lawyers who specialized in holding powerful families accountable. I thought about Maya's painting of my cottage restored and beautiful, about her simple faith that broken things could be fixed if you imagined them whole first. Maybe Elias was right. Maybe the way forward wasn't around the Harper family scandal, but through it. Maybe the woman I was becoming needed to stand up and fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been hurt by their corruption. I opened a new document and began typing. My name is Clara Monroe, and I was supposed to marry Ben Harper on June 15th. Instead, I discovered that my fiancé and his family had been planning to use our marriage to legitimize a money laundering operation that has been stealing from this city for decades. This is my story. As I wrote, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Ben's disappearance, a sense of purpose. I wasn't just healing from betrayal, I was transforming it into something meaningful. I was building a foundation not just for my own future, but for a community that deserved better than the corruption the Harper family had normalized. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its nightly quiet, but in my kitchen, by the light of a single lamp, I was writing the most important blueprint of my career, the plan for becoming the woman I was meant to be. The article ran in the Savannah Morning News on a Tuesday, above the fold with the headline, "Local Architect Exposes Wedding Day Fraud in Federal Case." By Wednesday morning, my phone had rung 57 times, my email inbox was flooded with interview requests, and there were 3 news vans parked on my street. I was hiding in my kitchen, blinds drawn, when someone knocked on my back door. Through the glass, I could see Maya's worried face peering in. "Clara, are you okay? There are people with cameras on your front porch." I let her in, grateful for her presence even though I knew Elias probably didn't want his daughter involved in my media circus. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just dealing with some work stuff." Maya looked around my kitchen, taking in the closed blinds and my obvious distress with the perceptiveness that children often possess. "Dad says when people are interested in what you're doing, it usually means you're doing something important. Your dad is a wise man. He also says you're very brave. He told me that sometimes doing the right thing makes life complicated, but that's not a reason not to do it." Before I could respond, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number with a New York area code. "Miss Monroe, this is Jessica Chen from 60 Minutes. We'd like to discuss having you on the program to talk about your experience with the Harper family investigation." By Thursday, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. The combination of a runaway groom, a federal fraud investigation, and a Southern Gothic setting proved irresistible to media producers. I gave 3 phone interviews and declined 4 requests for television appearances, trying to maintain some control over the narrative while still getting the truth out. The attention wasn't all positive. Harper family lawyers issued a statement, claiming I was a disgruntled former romantic partner seeking revenge through false accusations. Ben's mother, Eleanor Harper, gave an interview to the Society pages describing me as an opportunistic social climber who never fit into our family circles. The personal attacks stung, but they also confirmed that I'd made the right choice. In going public, people who had nothing to hide didn't usually resort to character assassination. On Friday evening, as I was finally beginning to feel like the media frenzy might be dying down, I looked out my front window to see Elias walking up my front path. He'd been notably absent all week, and I felt a stab of disappointment that the attention had driven him away. I opened the door before he could knock. I know, I said immediately. This isn't what you signed up for when you moved next door to me. I understand if you need some distance while things calm down. He looked confused. Clara, what are you talking about? The reporters, the attention, the circus my life has become. I know it's not what you want for Maya, and I don't blame you for Clara. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. I didn't come here to create distance. I came to check on you because I've been worried all week, and Maya has been asking why we haven't invited you for dinner. Oh, I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I thought, when I didn't hear from you, I was giving you space to handle the media attention without having to worry about neighborhood complications. But Maya pointed out that neighbors are supposed to help each other during difficult times, not disappear. He smiled slightly. She also said you probably needed someone to bring you real food, since you've been living on takeout and reporters' questions. As if summoned by his words, Maya appeared at his side carrying a covered casserole dish. We made lasagna, she announced. Dad's specialty. Well, one of his specialties. He's actually a really good cook, but he pretends he's not because he thinks it's more manly to order pizza. Maya, Elias said, but he was smiling. It's true. He made homemade pasta and everything. Mom taught him before she died, and he said cooking for friends is one of the ways we honor her memory. The simple kindness of the gesture of them thinking of me while my world was turned upside down nearly undid me. I felt tears prick my eyes and had to look away for a moment. That's incredibly thoughtful, I managed. Would you like to come in? I could use the company. As we sat around my kitchen table sharing Elias's excellent lasagna, I found myself relaxing for the first time all week. Maya chattered about school and her art projects, while Elias asked thoughtful questions about how I was handling the media attention and whether I felt safe in my house. I keep thinking this should feel worse than it does, I admitted. Having my personal life dissected in public, being called names by people who don't know me. But mostly I just feel free, like I'm finally telling the truth after months of living a lie. That's because you're fighting back instead of hiding, Elias said. There's power in that even when it's uncomfortable. The FBI agent said they expect to make arrests within the next few weeks. Apparently, my story corroborated evidence they'd been gathering for months. Maya looked up from her plate. What are arrests? It's when police take people to jail because they broke the law, I explained carefully. Good, Maya said with the fierce certainty of childhood. Bad people should go to jail so they can't hurt other people. Elias and I exchanged a look over her head. Her simple moral clarity was both touching and slightly intimidating. Maya's right, Elias said quietly. Justice isn't always comfortable, but it's necessary. After dinner, Maya curled up on my couch with a book while Elias helped me wash dishes. The domestic normalcy of it felt like a gift after the chaos of the week. Clara, he said as we dried the last plate, I need to tell you something. When the story first broke, I got a call from the hospital administration. Some of the board members have connections to the Harper family, and they suggested it might be better if I maintain some distance from you until the investigation is resolved. My stomach dropped. And I told them that I'd choose my friends based on their character, not their convenience to hospital politics. He set down the dish towel and turned to face me fully. I also told them that any institution that would penalize someone for standing up to corruption isn't somewhere I want to work. Elias, you can't risk your career for me. Maya needs stability. Maya needs to see that her father stands up for people he cares about. She needs to know that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. His eyes were serious as they met mine. And I need you to know that whatever happens with this investigation, whatever the Harper family tries to do to discredit you, you're not alone. The weight of his words, the steadiness of his support, broke through the careful control I'd been maintaining all week. I felt tears spill over, and when Elias stepped forward to wrap me in his arms, I let myself lean into his strength. I'm scared, I whispered against his shoulder. Not of the Harper family or the media attention, but of this, of caring about you and Maya, when everything in my life is uncertain. Everything is always uncertain, he said softly. That's what Sarah's death taught me. The only thing we can control is how we treat the people who matter to us while we have the chance. We stood there in my kitchen, holding each other while Maya read on the couch and the evening light faded outside. It wasn't a romantic moment exactly, we were both too raw, too careful for that. But it was something deeper, a recognition that we were both rebuilding our lives from loss, and that maybe we didn't have to do it alone. The moment was interrupted by the sharp ring of my phone. I pulled back from Elias to see Agent Torres's number on the screen. "I should take this," I said apologetically. "Miss Monroe." Agent Torres's voice was crisp with satisfaction. "I wanted to let you know that we've made arrests in the Harper Development case. Benjamin Harper was apprehended at a hotel in Georgetown, Cayman Islands, and we executed warrants for his father and 2 other family members this morning." Relief flooded through me so suddenly that I had to sit down. "What happens now?" "Now we build our case for trial. And Miss Monroe, your cooperation was instrumental in making these arrests possible. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." After I hung up, I found Elias and Maya both watching me expectantly. "They arrested Ben," I said simply. "And his father." "It's over." Maya clapped her hands together. "The bad people got caught." "The bad people got caught," I agreed, smiling at her enthusiasm. But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't really over. There would be a trial, more media attention, probably more attempts by the Harper family to discredit me. The road ahead was still uncertain. What wasn't uncertain anymore was that I had people who would walk that road with me. I looked at Elias, who was watching me with quiet pride, and at Maya, who had made me part of her world with the generous heart of a child, and I realized that losing Ben's false love had led me to something much more valuable: genuine friendship, real community, and the possibility of a love built on truth instead of lies. Saturday morning brought a new development: a call from my insurance company informing me that someone had vandalized my car during the night. I walked outside to find all 4 tires slashed and lyre scratched into the paint on the driver's side door, probably teenagers, the police officer said as he filled out the report, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it any more than I did. I was standing in my driveway, looking at the damage and trying not to feel intimidated, when Elias appeared beside me. "This is escalating," he said quietly, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. "It's just property," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "It can be fixed. Clara, this isn't random vandalism. Someone is trying to send you a message." Before I could respond, Maya came running over from their house, then stopped short when she saw my car. "Who did that?" she demanded, her young face fierce with indignation. "We don't know, sweetheart," I said gently. "Well, they're mean and stupid," she declared, "and they can't spell. You're not a liar, you're the one telling the truth." Her absolute certainty, her unwavering support, steadied something in me that had been shaking since I'd seen the damage. "You know what?" I said, looking at my vandalized car with new eyes. "You're absolutely right. This just proves that what I'm doing matters. People don't try to silence you unless you're saying something they don't want heard. That's the spirit," Elias said, but I could see the concern he was trying to hide. "Still, I think you should consider staying somewhere else for a few days, until things calm down." No, the word came out more firmly than I'd intended. "I'm not going to be driven out of my own home by people who think intimidation isn't acceptable." Response to the truth. "This is my neighborhood, my house, my life. I'm staying." Maya nodded approvingly. "Besides, we're right next door if you need help. Dad has a really loud voice when he needs to scare bad people." Despite everything, I found myself laughing. "I'll keep that in mind." That afternoon, as I waited for the tow truck to take my car to be repaired, I received an unexpected visitor. A black sedan pulled up to my curb, and a woman in an expensive suit got out. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that comes from years of getting what you want. "Miss Monroe, I'm Victoria Whitfield. I represent several historic preservation organizations in Savannah. I was wondering if we might have a conversation." I invited her in, curious about what she wanted. We sat in my living room, and she got straight to the point. "Miss Monroe, your decision to come forward about the Harper family's activities has had significant impact on our community. Several projects that were moving forward based on Harper Development's involvement are now under review. I'm sorry if that's caused complications." "Don't apologize," she said firmly. "You've exposed a network of corruption that has been damaging our city's historic integrity for years. What I'm here to discuss is the future." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with possibility. "There are going to be opportunities, Miss Monroe. Properties that were illegally acquired will be returned to the city. Funds that were misappropriated will need to be properly directed. Historic buildings that were damaged by Harper Development's shoddy work will need restoration by architects who actually care about preservation. I felt my pulse quicken. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your reputation for integrity, combined with your architectural skills, makes you exactly the kind of professional our community needs going forward. Would you be interested in consulting on some of these restoration projects? It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed of, meaningful work that combined my passion for historic preservation with my desire to serve the community. But I couldn't help being cautious. Miss Whitfield, I appreciate the offer, but I have to ask, aren't you concerned about the controversy surrounding my name right now? She smiled. Miss Monroe, controversy based on doing the right thing isn't controversy, it's leadership. The kind of leadership our preservation community has been lacking for too long. After she left, I sat in my living room with her business card in my hand, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet in a good way for the first time in weeks. Maybe Elias had been right about fighting back, creating opportunities, rather than just solving problems. That evening, he and Maya came over for dinner again, a tradition that was becoming precious to me. As we cooked together in my kitchen, Maya chattering about her day and Elias quietly helping with preparations, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced with Ben. This wasn't about grand gestures or public displays of affection. It was about showing up, day after day, in small ways that mattered. I have news, I announced, as we sat down to eat. I may have some new work coming my way. Historic preservation projects that need architects with clean reputations. That's wonderful, Elias said, and the genuine warmth in his voice made my chest tighten with affection. Does this mean you'll be too busy for art projects? Maya asked, looking worried. Never too busy for art projects, I assured her. In fact, I was hoping you might help me design something for the cottage renovation. I'm thinking about turning it into a proper guest house, and it could use an artist's touch. Her face lit up. Really? I could design a mural for the wall by the garden. I'd love that. As we talked about the cottage renovation, about Maya's ideas for the mural, about Elias's suggestions for the guest bathroom layout, I realized that this was what I'd been searching for without knowing it. Not a fairy tale romance with dramatic declarations and expensive gestures, but this, a quiet evening with people who saw me clearly and chose to stay anyway. The Harper family had taken a lot from me, my faith and love, my sense of security, my trust in my own judgment. But they'd also given me something unexpected, the chance to discover who I really was when everything false was stripped away. And the woman I'd discovered was someone worth fighting for, someone worth building a life with, someone worthy of the kind of steady, honest love that was growing between me and the man sitting across my kitchen table. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening quiet. But inside my house, around my table, the future was being planned. One conversation at a time, one shared meal at a time, one act of faith at a time. And for the first time since Ben's disappearance, I could hardly wait to see what came next. The knock on my door came at 7 in the morning on a Sunday, too early for neighbors and too persistent for delivery services. I padded downstairs in my robe, expecting to find another reporter or perhaps someone else with a message from the Harper family's remaining allies. Instead, I found myself face to face with a man I hadn't seen in 15 years. Hello, Clara, my father said, his weathered hands gripping a worn duffel bag. I know I should have called first, but I wasn't sure you'd answer. Caleb Monroe looked older than his 62 years, his hair completely gray now and deep lines etched around eyes that were the same green as mine. He was thinner than I remembered, cleaner somehow, and wearing clothes that looked new but inexpensive. The smell of alcohol that had always clung to him was gone, replaced by the scent of soap and coffee. Dad? The word felt strange in my mouth. I hadn't said it aloud in over a decade. What are you doing here? I've been following the news, he said simply. About what happened with your wedding, about this corruption case you're involved in. I thought maybe you could use some family support. I stood in my doorway, torn between the impulse to slam the door and the curiosity that had always been my weakness. The man who had walked out on our family when I was 17, who had chosen alcohol over his wife and daughters, who had broken my mother's heart and taught me not to trust men who made promises they couldn't keep, was standing on my porch, offering support. I don't know if that's a good idea, I said finally. I understand, he said, and something in his voice, a steadiness I didn't remember, made me look at him more carefully. Clara, I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. I know I lost that right a long time ago, but I'm sober now. 5 years, 3 months, and 16 days. And part of making amends is showing up when the people you hurt are going through difficult times, whether they want you there or not. Despite my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him in. We sat across from each other in my living room, the silence heavy with 15 years of absence and accumulated hurt. You look good, he said finally. Strong, like your mother. Don't. I said sharply. Don't talk about Mom. You don't get to invoke her memory when you're the one who broke her heart. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. You're right. I don't deserve to talk about Elizabeth. But I need you to know that losing her was the wake-up call I should have had years earlier. It just took me too long to hear it. She died 3 years ago, Dad. Where were you then? In rehab for the 3rd time. I wanted to come to the funeral, but Gwen told me I'd only make things harder for you and your mother's family. She was right. He looked around my beautifully restored house, taking in the careful details and elegant proportions. I'm proud of what you've built here, of who you've become despite having a father who wasn't there when you needed him. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on my back door. Through the glass, I could see Maya's face, bright with her usual morning cheerfulness. That's my neighbor, I explained to my father. She's 10 years old and has a tendency to check on people she cares about. I let Maya in, and she immediately noticed the tension in the room. Oh, she said, her social instincts kicking in. I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company. I just brought you some of Dad's coffee cake. She held up a plate covered with a kitchen towel. Maya, this is my father, Caleb. Dad, this is Maya Grant. She and her father live next door. Maya stepped forward with the fearless politeness of a well-raised child and extended her hand. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Monroe. You have the same eyes as Clara. My father shook her small hand with surprising gentleness. It's nice to meet you too, Maya. And you're right about the eyes. Clara got them from me, though she uses hers much better than I ever did. Maya tilted her head, considering this. Dad says eyes are for seeing the truth, not just looking at things. Maybe you just needed practice. The simple wisdom of her statement hung in the air between us. My father's eyes filled with tears. He didn't try to hide. Your father sounds like a smart man, he said softly. He is. He's a doctor, and he fixes people when they're broken. He says sometimes people break in ways you can't see from the outside, but that doesn't mean they can't be fixed. Maya looked between my father and me with the intuitive understanding that children sometimes possess. Are you fixing something that was broken? I'm trying to, my father said. It might be too late, but I'm trying. After Maya left to get ready for church with Elias, my father and I continued our careful conversation. He told me about the years after he'd left, the progression of his alcoholism, the jobs lost, the relationships destroyed, the final rock bottom that had come when he'd woken up in a hospital with no memory of how he'd gotten there. The doctor told me I was going to die if I didn't stop drinking, he said. Not eventually. Soon, and for the first time. That scared me more than the idea of living without alcohol. Why now? I asked. Why come here now, when my life is already complicated? Because I read about what that Harper boy did to you, and I recognize something in the story. The way he made you doubt yourself. The way he made his problems into your fault. The way he disappeared when things got difficult. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Clara, I did all of those things to your mother. I made her responsible for my drinking. I made her doubt her own perceptions, and I disappeared. Emotionally, long before I left. Physically, I know what it's like to be abandoned by someone who was supposed to love you. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you don't let his failure define your worth the way I let my father's abandonment define mine. I'm suggesting that you remember you come from a long line of strong women who built good lives despite the weak men who disappointed them. He paused, gathering courage. And I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for the Monroe men to start doing better. We talked for 3 hours, moving carefully around years of hurt and anger. He told me about his work as a handyman at a halfway house, about the men he'd met who were trying to rebuild their lives from nothing, about the small daily choices that added up to sobriety and self-respect. I told him about my business, about the cottage renovation, about my growing feelings for Elias and the complicated joy of caring about Maya. He sounds like a good man, my father said when I described Elias's steady support during the Harper investigation. He is. But I'm scared of trusting my judgment again. The last man I thought was good turned out to be a criminal. Clara, the difference between a good man and a bad man isn't whether he makes mistakes. It's whether he takes responsibility for them. From what you've told me, this Elias has been honest with you about his grief, honest about his fears, honest about his feelings. The Harper boy lied about everything from the beginning. How do I know the difference? How do I trust myself to see clearly? My father was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft with hard-earned wisdom. You listened to your instincts, not your hopes. Your instincts told you something was wrong with Harper. You said so yourself. You just ignored them because you wanted the fairy tale to be real. But with this Elias, what do your instincts tell you? I thought about it honestly, about the way Elias had never pressured me for anything, never made promises he couldn't keep, never tried to be anything other than exactly who he was, about how he'd supported my decision to fight the Harper family, even when it brought chaos to his quiet life, about how he'd shown up consistently, day after day, without drama or grand gestures. They tell me he's safe, I said finally. Not perfect, but safe, real. Then trust that. Trust yourself. That afternoon, my father helped me work on the cottage renovation. He was surprisingly skilled with his hands, and as we installed new windows and repaired damaged floorboards, I caught glimpses of the man he might have been if he'd made different choices. It didn't erase the years of abandonment or make up for the pain he'd caused, but it offered something I hadn't expected. The possibility of a different kind of relationship, based on who we both were now, rather than who we'd been then. Elias and Maya returned from church as we were taking a break on the cottage porch, and I made introductions with some nervousness. But Elias, with his characteristic perceptiveness, seemed to understand immediately what was happening. Mr. Monroe, he said, shaking my father's hand. Clara's told me a lot about her family. It's good to meet you. Please, call me Caleb. And I hope she hasn't told you too much about her family. We haven't exactly been our best selves over the years. Well, Maya piped up, Dad says families are just groups of people who keep choosing each other even when it's hard. Maybe you're choosing each other now. That evening, as my father prepared to check into a nearby motel, Elias invited him to stay for dinner. The four of us sat around my kitchen table, an unlikely family group, sharing stories and passing dishes. Maya entertained us with descriptions of her latest art projects, while my father and Elias discovered a shared interest in woodworking. Clara, my father said as we were clearing dishes, I want you to know that watching you handle this corruption case, seeing how you've refused to be intimidated or silenced, has made me prouder than I have any right to be. You're the kind of person I always hoped you'd become, despite having me as an example of how not to live. Dad, no, let me finish. I know I can't undo the past. I know I can't give you back the father you needed when you were growing up. But I want to be the father you deserve now, if you'll let me. Not to assuage my guilt, but because you're remarkable, and I want to be part of your life going forward. Later that night, after my father had gone to his motel and Maya had been tucked into bed next door, Elias and I sat on my front porch watching the Spanish moss sway in the evening breeze. How do you feel about your father showing up? He asked gently, confused, angry, hopeful, terrified. I leaned back in my chair, trying to sort through the complicated emotions. I spent so many years building walls against the possibility of him coming back, and now that he's here, I don't know whether to let him in or protect myself from more disappointment. What does your gut tell you? I thought about my father's steady hands as he'd worked on the cottage, about the way he'd listened to Maya without condescension, about his willingness to sit with my anger without defending himself. That he's different, that whatever happened to make him get sober was real, but also that it doesn't erase 15 years of abandonment, and I don't have to pretend it does. You don't, Elias agreed. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means choosing not to let someone else's past mistakes control your future. Is that what you did? With your wife's accident? Elias was quiet for a long moment. Sarah died because a drunk driver ran a red light. For the first year after her death, I was consumed with rage at him, at the system that gave him a light sentence, at the unfairness of losing someone so good because of someone else's selfish choices. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But eventually, I realized that my anger was hurting Maya more than it was hurting anyone else. She needed a father who could help her heal, not one who was trapped in his own bitterness. How did you let go of the anger? I didn't let go of it exactly. I just stopped letting it be the most important thing in my life. I focused on building something good with Maya, on being present for her healing instead of absent in my grief. He looked at me, his eyes soft in the porch light. Watching you fight for justice instead of just fighting for revenge has reminded me that there's a difference between holding people accountable and holding on to pain. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the neighborhood settling around us. Somewhere down the street, a piano was being played, the melody drifting through the evening air like a lullaby. Elias, I said finally, I need you to know that having you and Maya in my life during all of this has meant everything to me. You've both shown me what it looks like when people choose to show up consistently, without conditions or complications. Clara, he said softly, we're not going anywhere. Whatever happens with the trial, whatever your father decides to do, whatever direction your life takes, Maya and I will be right next door, ready to help with renovations or share dinner or just sit in comfortable silence. Promise? Promise. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about promises and the people who keep them. My father had broken promises for most of my life, but he was here now, trying to make different choices. Ben had made promises he'd never intended to keep, but Elias made promises he'd already proven he could honor. Maybe the measure of a person wasn't whether they'd ever failed, but whether they showed up to repair the damage when they did. Maybe the measure of love wasn't grand gestures and perfect moments, but daily kindness and steady presence. Maybe the foundation I was building for my new life wasn't just about the cottage renovation or the career opportunities or even the federal case against the Harper family. Maybe it was about learning to recognize the difference between people who made promises they couldn't keep and people who kept promises they'd never had to make. And maybe finally, I was ready to build something lasting with someone who understood that love was constructed one honest conversation at a time, one shared meal at a time, one kept promise at a time. The federal courthouse in Savannah was a study in intimidation, marble columns, soaring ceilings, and an atmosphere of weighty judgment that made even innocent people feel guilty. I sat in the witness waiting room, my hands folded carefully in my lap, wearing my most conservative navy suit and trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. Remember, Patricia Wells said, reviewing her notes one final time, answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information, don't speculate, and don't let the defense attorneys rattle you. You're telling the truth, and the truth is powerful. Through the window, I could see protesters gathered on the courthouse steps. Some carried signs supporting the Harper family, calling the investigation a witch hunt against successful Southern families. Others held signs demanding justice for victims of corruption. The division in the community was stark, and I was about to walk into the center of it. My father appeared in the doorway, having driven back from Atlanta where he'd been staying with Gwen. His presence still felt surreal, but over the past month, we'd been carefully rebuilding a relationship based on who we were now rather than who we'd been 15 years ago. How are you holding up, sweetheart? He asked, settling beside me on the uncomfortable wooden bench, nervous, determined, ready to get this over with. I smoothed my skirt for the 100th time. Where are Elias and Maya? In the gallery. Maya made you a good luck charm. He handed me a small origami crane made from bright yellow paper. She said cranes are symbols of hope and healing in Japanese culture, and she thought you could use both today. I tucked the crane carefully into my jacket pocket, drawing strength from Maya's faith in me. Over the past month, as the trial preparations had intensified, she'd become my unofficial cheerleader, creating artwork for my refrigerator and asking daily about when the bad people would finally be punished. Clara? A court clerk appeared in the doorway. It's time. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, community members, and people whose lives had been touched by the Harper family's corruption. I spotted Eleanor Harper in the front row, her face a mask of dignified outrage, flanked by expensive lawyers and supportive family friends. Ben sat at the defendant's table looking pale and younger than his 34 years, avoiding my eyes as I walked to the witness stand. As I was sworn in, I caught sight of Elias in the gallery. He nodded slightly, a small gesture of encouragement that steadied my nerves. Maya sat beside him, her young face serious with the gravity of the moment. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Richardson, was a man in his 40s with the kind of quiet intensity that suggested he'd built his career on cases like this one. He approached the witness stand with respectful professionalism. Miss Monroe, Can you please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Benjamin Harper? For the next hour, I walked the jury through my relationship with Ben, from our meeting at the museum gala, to our engagement, to his disappearance on our wedding day. I described the prenup I'd discovered, the business deals he'd tried to involve me in, and the growing sense that something wasn't right with his family's business practices. Miss Monroe Richardson continued, did Mr. Harper ever discuss the source of funding for Harper Development's projects? He mentioned several times that his family had connections that made financing easier than it was for other developers. He said they had relationships with city officials and bank executives that went back generations. Did he ever specify the nature of these relationships? Objection. Ben's lawyer interjected. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Richardson adjusted his approach. Did Mr. Harper ever ask you to invest money in his family's projects? Yes. He wanted me to invest $200,000 in a development project called Meridian Landing. He said it would be a good way to merge our professional lives and that I would be listed as the primary contractor. Did you understand what being listed as the primary contractor would mean legally? I thought it meant I would be professionally responsible for the quality of the work. I didn't understand at the time that it would also make me legally liable for any irregularities in the project's financing or execution. I continued testifying for another hour, describing Ben's behavior in the months leading up to our wedding, his increasing secrecy about business matters, and his attempts to isolate me from his family's financial discussions while simultaneously making me financially dependent on him. Then came the cross-examination. Ben's attorney, Marcus Whitman, was everything I'd expected from a high-priced defense lawyer, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and skilled at making victims feel like criminals. He approached the witness stand with a patronizing smile that immediately put me on guard. Miss Monroe, isn't it true that you pursued my client aggressively from the moment you met him? No, that's not true. But you did attend multiple social events where you knew he would be present, correct? I attended charity galas and community events because I'm active in Savannah's preservation community. Mr. Harper attended the same events for his own reasons. And when my client proposed marriage, you immediately began planning an elaborate wedding that cost over $100,000, correct? The wedding costs were discussed and agreed upon by both of us. Whitman produced a folder from his table. Miss Monroe, isn't it true that you were struggling financially at the time of your engagement to my client? Patricia had prepared me for this line of questioning, but it still stung. My business had experienced a temporary downturn due to the recession's impact on construction projects. In fact, you had defaulted on 2 business loans and were in danger of losing your home, weren't you? I had extended the terms of 2 loans, yes, but I was current on all my payments and was never in danger of foreclosure. So when my client offered to help you financially, you were grateful, weren't you? Your client offered to merge our finances after marriage, which is normal for engaged couples. But you were hoping that marriage would solve your financial problems, correct? The implication hung in the air like poison. Whitman was painting me as a gold digger who had pursued Ben for his money and then turned vindictive when he'd escaped my grasp. Mr. Whitman, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my anger, I fell in love with your client because I believed he was honest and kind. I discovered after he abandoned me that he was neither. My financial situation had nothing to do with my decision to cooperate with federal investigators, and your client's money had nothing to do with why I loved him. But you were angry when he left you at the altar, weren't you? Yes, I was angry. I was hurt and humiliated and confused. But I was also concerned about why someone would disappear so suddenly without explanation, concerned enough to hire a lawyer and contact federal investigators. I hired a lawyer to protect myself when I discovered that your client had prepared legal documents that would have made me liable for his family's illegal activities. I contacted federal investigators because I learned that public funds had been misappropriated, and I felt a civic duty to report what I knew. Whitman continued his attack for another 30 minutes. Trying to paint me as a scorned woman seeking revenge through false accusations. But as he pressed, his condescending tone and obvious attempts at manipulation began to backfire. I could see the jury's expressions shifting from neutral attention to sympathy for my position. Finally, Richardson stood for redirect examination. Miss Monroe, if your motivation for cooperating with this investigation was financial gain or revenge, what exactly do you hope to gain from your testimony today? I hope to see justice done. I hope that people who abuse public trust are held accountable. And I hope that other women won't be targeted the way I was. Do you have any expectation of financial benefit from this prosecution? None whatsoever. In fact, this process has cost me clients and damaged my business reputation in some circles. Then why are you here? I looked out at the packed courtroom, at Elias and Maya in the gallery, at my father sitting beside Gwen, at the reporters and community members who had come to witness this moment of accountability, because someone has to speak for the people who were hurt by the Harper family's corruption. Someone has to say that public trust matters, that using government programs for personal profit is wrong, and that lying to people about the nature of your business dealings has real consequences. I paused, finding strength in my own conviction. I'm here because staying silent would make me complicit in allowing powerful people to escape justice. Thank you, Miss Monroe. No further questions. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not relief exactly, because the trial would continue for several more weeks, but a deep satisfaction that I had told the truth fully and fearlessly. Whatever the jury decided, I had done everything I could to ensure that justice had a chance. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I was surrounded by supporters: Patricia, my father, Gwen, and several members of the preservation community who had come to show solidarity. But the person I most wanted to see was Elias, who was waiting with Maya near the courthouse entrance. How do you feel? He asked quietly, searching my face for signs of how the testimony had affected me. Free, I said, surprising myself with the answer. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. Maya tugged on my jacket. Did you use the crane? Did it bring you good luck? I pulled the origami crane from my pocket. It's bright yellow. Paper slightly crumpled from being clutched during the more difficult moments of cross-examination. It brought me exactly what I needed, I told her. Hope and healing, just like you said. 3 weeks later, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts against Ben and his father. Ben received 5 years in federal prison for money laundering and fraud. His father received 8 years. Eleanor Harper and 2 other family members received shorter sentences and substantial fines. I wasn't in the courtroom when the verdicts were read by then. I had moved on to other things, other concerns, other building projects. But I felt a quiet satisfaction when Patricia called with the news. Justice hadn't healed all the wounds, but it had done something almost as important. It had proven that truth was stronger than power, that courage was stronger than corruption, and that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hard thing to do. That evening, Elias, Maya, and I celebrated with takeout pizza on my newly finished cottage porch. The renovation was complete, the space transformed into a beautiful guest house and studio that would serve as both a source of income and a symbol of what could be built from the ruins of what was lost. So what's next? Elias asked as we watched. The sunset paint, the Spanish moss gold, the Monroe Foundation, I said, referring to the nonprofit I'd established with the settlement money from a civil suit against the Harper family. We're going to provide architectural services for affordable housing projects and preservation work for communities that can't usually afford quality design. And personally, he asked softly. I looked at him, at this man who had become such an essential part of my daily happiness, and at Maya, who was drawing pictures of our celebration in her ever-present sketchbook. Personally, I'm thinking about permanence, about building something that will last, about making promises I can keep. He smiled, understanding exactly what I meant. I like the sound of that. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning that made Savannah's historic district look like a Christmas card, I stood in front of a beautifully restored Victorian mansion holding a pair of oversized scissors and trying not to cry in front of the news cameras. The Monroe Foundation for Community Architecture was officially opening its headquarters in a building that had once been slated for demolition by Harper Development. Instead, we'd restored it to serve as offices for my architectural firm, Meeting Space for Community Organizations, and a resource center for families seeking affordable housing solutions. Clara, are you ready? Asked the foundation's board president, Dr. Angela Reeves, a longtime advocate for historic preservation who had become both a mentor and a friend. I looked at the crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony: city officials, Preservation Society members, families from the affordable housing projects we'd already completed, reporters, and supporters who had rallied around the foundation's mission. In the front row, Elias stood with Maya, both of them beaming with pride. My father was there too, having driven down from Atlanta where he'd been working with a nonprofit organization that provided construction training for people in recovery. Ready, I said, lifting the scissors. As the ribbon fell away and the crowd applauded, Maya bounded forward with a large canvas that she and several other children had painted during our community workshops. This is for the foundation, she announced, holding up a colorful mural that depicted houses, families, and the words "Truth Begins Here" painted in her careful 10-year-old handwriting. Maya, I said, kneeling to her level, it's perfect. We'll hang it in the main conference room so everyone who comes here will see it. Good, she said seriously. Because Dad says when you're building something important, you need to remember why you're doing it. As the crowd moved inside for the reception, I found myself alone for a moment on the front steps, looking up at the building we'd saved and transformed. The restoration had taken 6 months of careful work, balancing historical accuracy with modern functionality. Every room had been designed to serve the foundation's mission of providing architectural services to underserved communities. Second thoughts? Elias asked, appearing beside me on the steps. Never, I said firmly, just taking a moment to appreciate how far we've come. I turned to look at him, this man who had become so central to my life that I couldn't imagine making major decisions without him. Over the past months, our relationship had deepened gradually and naturally, built on shared values and daily kindness rather than dramatic passion. Yes, you've been part of this from the beginning, Elias. You and Maya both. Your support made it possible for me to fight the Harper family, and your friendship gave me the strength to build something positive from the wreckage they left behind. He was quiet for a moment, studying my face in the morning light. Clara, there's something I want to give you. Something I've been carrying around for a few weeks, waiting for the right moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. But instead of the ring box I might have expected, it was an antique compass with an engraved inscription, "For Clara, who always finds true north." It's not an engagement ring, he said softly. I know we're not ready for that yet, and Maya needs more time to adjust to the idea of our relationship becoming something permanent. But I wanted you to have something that represents what you mean to me. I turned the compass over in my hands, feeling the weight of the metal and the significance of the gift. What does it represent? Constancy, reliability, the ability to find your way even when everything around you is uncertain. He paused, gathering courage. Clara, you've shown me that it's possible to build something beautiful after loss, to choose hope over bitterness, to fight for justice without being consumed by anger. You've made me believe that Maya and I can have a future that includes love again. And I've learned from you that love doesn't have to be complicated to be deep, that showing up consistently matters more than grand gestures, and that some of the best families are the ones we choose rather than the ones we're born into. We stood together on the steps, holding hands and watching as people moved through the building we'd created together, a space dedicated to helping others build the homes and communities they deserved. Clara? Maya appeared in the doorway, her face bright with excitement. People are asking for you inside. They want to see the plans for the next housing project. Coming, I said, but I paused for one more moment to appreciate the scene. Through the windows, I could see families exploring the building, children playing in the community room, and volunteers setting up for the afternoon's housing workshop. It was exactly what I'd envisioned when I'd first conceived of the foundation, a place where architecture served community, where beautiful design was accessible to everyone, and where the work of building better lives was truly collaborative. As we moved inside, Maya slipped between Elias and me, taking both our hands in her small ones. This feels like a family, she said matter-of-factly. Not the kind where people have to get married or anything, but the kind where people choose to take care of each other. Elias and I exchanged a look over her head, both of us smiling at her casual wisdom. You're absolutely right, I said. That's exactly what this is. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tours, presentations, and conversations with community members interested in the foundation's services. By evening, when the last visitors had left and we were cleaning up, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with public recognition and everything to do with meaningful work shared with people I loved. So, my father said as he helped stack chairs in the conference room, "What's the next project?" "A community garden and affordable housing development in the Kyler Brownville neighborhood," I said, consulting my ever-present notebook. 12 units of senior housing, a community center, and green space designed by the residents themselves. Sounds ambitious. The best projects usually are. I looked around the foundation's new headquarters, at Maya's mural hanging in the conference room, at Elias discussing construction timelines with one of our volunteer contractors. But we've got good people to build it with. Later that evening, the four of us, Elias, Maya, my father, and I, sat on my front porch sharing takeout Chinese food and planning the cottage's transformation into a permanent studio space. The cottage had served as our foundation headquarters during the renovation of the main building, but now it would return to its original purpose as my personal workspace. I have an idea for the cottage, Maya announced, setting down her chopsticks. What if we painted a timeline on one wall? Like, all the important things that happened here, from when it was first built to now. That's a wonderful idea, I said. What would we include? Maya's eyes lit up as she began planning aloud. When the house was first built, when different families lived here, when Clara bought it and fixed it up, when Ben disappeared and Clara got sad, when we moved next door and became friends, when Clara fought the bad people and won, when we started the foundation. She paused, considering, and maybe some blank space for the things that haven't happened yet but will. I love that, Elias said, a visual reminder that every ending is also a beginning. As Maya continued describing her vision for the timeline mural, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. A year ago, I'd been planning a wedding that would have trapped me in a life built on lies. Now I was sitting on my own porch, surrounded by people who knew me completely and chose to love me anyway, planning projects that would make my community stronger and more beautiful. The compass Elias had given me sat in my pocket, a tangible reminder that true north wasn't a place but a direction toward honesty, toward justice, toward the kind of love that grew stronger through difficulty rather than weaker. Clara? Maya's voice interrupted my reverie. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about foundations, I said truthfully. About how the strongest buildings are the ones built on solid ground, with good materials, by people who care about the work they're doing. Like this house. Like this house. Like the foundation building. Like families and friendships and communities that are built to last. Maya nodded seriously. Dad says the most important thing about building something is making sure it can handle storms. I looked at Elias, at this man who had walked through his own storms and emerged with his capacity for love intact, who had taught me that resilience was not about avoiding difficulty but about facing it with people you trusted. Your dad is very wise, I said. And I think we've built something that can handle whatever storms come next. As the evening settled around us, bringing with it the familiar sounds of our neighborhood church bells in the distance, Spanish moss rustling in the breeze, the soft murmur of neighbors talking on their own porches, I felt a profound sense of contentment. Not the desperate happiness I'd once confused with love, but something deeper and more sustainable, the quiet joy of a life built on truth. I have an announcement, my father said suddenly, his voice carrying the nervous energy of someone about to share important news. I've been offered a permanent position with the construction training program in Atlanta. Good benefits, steady work, the chance to help other people who are rebuilding their lives like I am. Dad, that's wonderful, I said, meaning it completely. Over the past months, we'd found our way to a relationship that acknowledged our history without being trapped by it. He would never be the father I'd needed as a child, but he was becoming the father I could respect as an adult. The best part is, Atlanta's only a few hours away. Close enough for weekend visits and holiday dinners, far enough away that we both have space to keep growing. He looked at me seriously. If that's something you'd want, I'd want that very much. Maya clapped her hands together. That means you can come to my birthday party next month and see the cottage when we finish the timeline mural. I wouldn't miss either one, my father promised, and something in his voice told me this was a promise he would keep. Later, after my father had returned to his hotel and Maya had been tucked into bed next door, Elias and I sat alone on the porch swing he'd installed the previous month. The addition had been his idea, a contribution to what he called the slow domestication of Clara's perfect house. How are you feeling about everything? He asked, his arm around my shoulders as we rocked gently in the evening air. Grateful, I said without hesitation. A year ago, I thought happiness meant having my life planned out perfectly, having all the details arranged and guaranteed. Now I've learned that real contentment comes from being with people who see you clearly and choose to stay anyway, even when those people come with complications. 10-year-old daughters who leave art supplies everywhere, demanding careers that involve trauma and late-night emergencies, and still healing hearts that sometimes need extra patience. I turned to look at him, this man who had never tried to be anything other than exactly who he was, who had offered me not a fairy tale romance, but something far more valuable, genuine partnership. Especially then, I said firmly, Elias, I don't want simple. I don't want easy. I want real. I want the kind of love that grows stronger when life gets complicated, not weaker. Good, he said, pulling me closer. Because Maya informed me yesterday that she's ready for us to make it official whenever we are. Apparently, she's tired of having to explain to her friends that you're sort of like a stepmom but not really. I laughed, picturing Maya's matter-of-fact approach to our unconventional family situation. And what did you tell her? I told her that the best relationships aren't rushed, that some things are worth waiting for, and that when adults make promises to each other, those promises should be kept forever. He paused, his voice growing softer. I also told her that I love you, and that when the time is right, I hope you want to build something permanent with us. The words hung in the air between us, not a proposal exactly, but a statement of intention that felt more meaningful than any grand romantic gesture could have been. I love you too, I said simply. Both of you. And when we're all ready, when Maya feels secure and you feel ready and I feel like I've fully healed from everything that happened with Ben, I want nothing more than to make this family official. No rush, no rush. We have all the time in the world. As we sat there swinging gently in the darkness, I thought about the difference between the woman who had stood in that bridal suite 13 months ago and the woman I was now. That woman had been planning a wedding. This woman was building a life. That woman had been focused on appearances and expectations. This woman was focused on authenticity and growth. That woman had been afraid of being alone. This woman had learned that solitude and loneliness were entirely different things. Elias, I said quietly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if Ben hadn't disappeared? If he'd actually gone through with the wedding? Do you? I considered the question seriously. Sometimes. And I always come to the same conclusion. I would have spent years slowly realizing that I'd married a stranger, that the life I thought I wanted was built on lies, that I'd chosen security over authenticity. It would have been a slower disaster, but still a disaster. So you're grateful he left? I'm grateful for everything that led me here, to this porch, with you and Maya, building something real instead of something that just looked good from the outside. A comfortable silence settled between us, broken only by the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant sound of a jazz musician practicing somewhere in the neighborhood. These were the sounds of home, I realized, not dramatic or exciting, but constant and comforting. There's something else I want to tell you, I said, remembering the decision I'd made earlier that week. I've been thinking about expanding the foundation's work, not just affordable housing, but disaster relief architecture, helping communities rebuild after hurricanes, floods, other catastrophes that are becoming more common. That sounds like it could involve travel, long hours, difficult conditions. It would. And I wanted to make sure you and Maya would be okay with that before I committed to anything. Because you're part of my decision-making process now. Both of you. Elias was quiet for a moment, and I could feel him considering not just my words, but the deeper question they represented. Whether our relationship was strong enough to support individual growth and professional challenges. Clara, he said finally, one of the things I love most about you is your commitment to using your talents to help people. If you want to expand that work, Maya and I will support you completely. We'll be here when you come home, and we'll be proud of what you're accomplishing while you're away. And what about us? What about building this relationship? Some relationships are built by spending every moment together. Others are built by choosing each other every day, whether you're in the same room or on different continents. He turned to face me fully. I'd rather have a partner who follows her calling and comes home to share her adventures than someone who gives up her dreams for the illusion of security. His words crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. This was what partnership looked like. Not two people clinging to each other out of fear or need, but two people supporting each other's growth and trusting that their bond was strong enough to weather whatever challenges came their way. In that case, I said, pulling out my phone, I have a call to make to the International Red Cross. They've been asking me to consult on a housing project in the Philippines. As I scrolled through my contacts, looking for the number I'd saved weeks ago, I felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Not the desperate excitement of planning a fantasy future, but the steady pleasure of work that mattered, shared with people who understood why it mattered. The house around us, the house we'd built together through daily choices and small acts of faith, felt solid and permanent in the darkness. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was finished, but because it was still growing, still evolving, still becoming the home we all needed it to be. And in the morning, there would be new projects to plan, new challenges to face, new opportunities to build something beautiful and lasting in a world that too often settled for pretty facades over strong foundations. But tonight, there was this: the gentle swing of the porch, the warm presence of someone who knew all my flaws and chose to love me anyway, and the quiet certainty that some things, the most important things, were worth building slowly, carefully, with an eye toward permanence rather than perfection. This was the house we built, not just the physical structure, with its restored heart, pine floors, and careful historical details, but the life we'd created within its walls. A life built on truth instead of illusion, on daily choices instead of grand gestures, on the radical act of showing up for each other, day after day, in all the ordinary moments that add up to an extraordinary love. And tomorrow, we would keep building. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.